Well, last night, more than 1,000 people gathered in Melbourne as part of the latest meeting in a series of crisis town hall rallies being held around the nation to save Christian schools. Leaders of the Christian school movement have organised these events to showcase to politicians and the community the public good Christian education uniquely provides to Australia. Now, regular viewers and listeners will be aware that the Albanese government plans, through secret legislation that has been inspired by an Australian Law Reform Commission report, it plans to strip religious schools of the freedom to employ staff who share the ethos of the parents and that of the school. In effect, this would end Christian and religious education in Australia. I attended the town hall event in Regent's Park in Sydney 2 weeks ago, and after hearing the stories of students and parents and teachers of what their school means to them, I couldn't help but think the Albanese government is doing the work of Lord of the Rings-style orcs, hell-bent on destroying something very precious. Now, Simon Kennedy is the Associate Editor of Quadrant and has written a brilliant article entitled Endangered Christian Schools. He joins me now. Simon, thanks so much for your time. You don't beat around the bush in your article. You write that the LGBT plus lobby want to reduce parental choice. Why won't they allow diversity in Australian society?
I think there are a couple of reasons, and there's a bit of a history behind this, Lyle. Thanks for having me on, by the way. Back in the Howard government era, they opened up parental choice for parents to choose between lots of different kinds of schools. They opened up government funding for a wide range of schools, including religious and particularly independent Christian schools. And since then, Australian parents have been able to choose freely between sending their children to a state school, sending them to a church school, independent private school, and Christian school, and the Christian school sectors flourished since then. The LGBTQ plus lobby don't want parents to be able to choose particularly Christian schools. So they don't want them to be able to choose distinctively Christian schools, Lyle, because those schools tend to not toe the line on the issues that those lobbies care about. They don't allow for the hiring of staff who have views and lifestyles that don't match the ethos and beliefs of the school. And they, at times, will also restrict their enrolment policies to ensure that Christian students are given priority in enrolling in the school as well. And so therefore Christian families have access to this education. But I suppose that what we're seeing here, Lyle, is a concerted effort by the lobbies in question, lobby groups in question, but also now by the Labor government to squash parental choice in this way.
Yeah, it seems crazy. I mean, a lot of people would say, well, what's wrong with a Christian school being able to employ Christian staff? Why should one particular political lobby try and force its worldview on another group of Australians? That's really what's at stake here, isn't it?
That's exactly what's at stake, Lyle. The way I put it in my article, which people can read in Quadrant magazine, and it's available online if they want to read it there too. The way I put it in my article is that the LGBTQ lobby are trying to shape the lives and loves of the students in these schools, just as Christian teachers and parents are trying to shape the lives and loves of the students as well. The question is not whether people's lives and loves will be shaped, but who shapes them. And that's really what's at stake here. Are Christian schools going to be able to choose who they have influenced their students or not?
Mm. Well, what you just described used to be what we thought of as a pluralistic society, where you might have, one sort of worldview there and another sort of worldview there, and we would live and let live. But what we've got now is the legal apparatus of the state being weaponised against one group of Australians' worldview.
That's exactly what's happening, and I suppose in the past, we had a Christian culture, broadly speaking. We had a Christian culture where Christian people were allowed to start institutions, were allowed to run institutions according to their beliefs and their values. That's been shifting over the last few decades quite dramatically. It's probably been happening for longer than that, to be honest, but I think that the changes have been more rapid in recent decades.
Mm.
And we've seen the changes occurring since for example, the marriage. It wasn't really a plebiscite, was it? It was a postal vote, and the change to the marriage laws. We've seen shifts around what's being taught in schools through safe schools and other curriculum programs that are normalising pagan sexual ethics and what we might call kind of modern family sexual ethics. And, these things are realities that are becoming more and more prominent in our country. I mean, there are more and more people who support these views, are comfortable with them, and are living these lifestyles for better or for worse. And at the moment, Christian schools are under a lot of pressure to contort themselves into a shape where they have to accept these practices and these lifestyles and these views. I don't believe that's reasonable. I think organisations that are based on a very defined particular set of values should be allowed to operate according to those values, especially if those values and beliefs aren't actually causing anyone particular harm or generating violence or hate against other groups. This is really not the case with Christian schools. In fact, Christian schools are some of the best environments for students to learn in the country. And there are a lot of other fantastic schools out there. There's no need for teachers who don't adhere to Christian values and Christian beliefs to teach in Christian schools. They don't have to do that. There are many, many opportunities in other places, just as there are for families who don't accept Christian teachings and beliefs. There's a lot of school choice out there for them. What this proposed legislation at a federal level, and also some of the changes recently at a state level, and we can see it in Queensland with the recent laws around inherent requirements for teachers and staff. What these laws do effectively is reduce choice for a particular group of parents, and they are parents who want to give their children a Christian education.
Yeah, it's quite insidious. I wouldn't have thought this would ever happen in the Australia I grew up in. Simon, a lot of Christians stayed out of the same-sex marriage debate in 2017, the postal plebiscite that you referenced earlier. And one of the key sectors that did stay out of that debate was the Christian school movement. Was it naive then to think at the time that there would be no consequences to such a fundamental change in the law affecting our understanding of marriage, sexuality and family?
I think if people believed that was a naive thing to think. The fact that the Christian school sector stayed out of the debate would have been a prudential question for them. I don't think anyone in that sector would have necessarily thought it wouldn't have mattered what happened. But I suppose that as institutions, they're interested in maintaining a public face that is accepting and open to students and families of all kinds and all shapes. And that's reasonable, I think. But at the same time, what they probably didn't realise was the threat that these changes would pose to the institutions that they run. One of the things that has happened that's probably surprised Christian schools and other people, including myself, is that it's not the fact that the government is trying to shut down Christian schools because they're Christian. They're actually trying to reform the schools by law and by government fiat to make them less Christian. That probably wasn't a result that the Christian school sector were expecting.
Yes, you've got a quote in your article from an unnamed leader in the sector who says that the government isn't trying to shut down Christian schools but trying to regulate them out of existence. You also mentioned in your article that you referenced the takeover of Calvary Hospital in the ACT in Canberra, the sacking of the Essendon chairman Andrew Thorburn for his Christian views, and the legal case against Archbishop Julian Porteous in Hobart. And of course, there's many other examples, but these are just a few that you mentioned. And you talk about a suppression of Christian people and Christian institutions and Christian opinions. How should we respond to this suppression? That's a pretty strong word. It's something normally associated with totalitarian regimes, not with a country that we used to believe was a free country like Australia.
When I used the word suppression, I was thinking that what's happening is it's an implicit suppression. There are laws that I think limit speech, and in some cases, speech has to be limited. In what we're seeing here, though, in Australia, is a gradual cultural shift that is being implemented at a social level, but also at a legislative and regulatory level that means that Christians are less and less free to be able to speak their minds on issues of public importance. But not only that, the cases around the Essendon Football Club and Calvary Hospital are instances where, in the case of the hospital, it appears as though they were targeted for not offering the right kinds of quote unquote medical care. In this case, it was actually abortion access that was of concern. And I don't regard that as medical care at all, just so your viewers understand that clearly. But in the case of Andrew Thorburn, it wasn't an institution, it was an individual who wasn't able to carry out his duties at a secular institution because of his alignment with a conservative Christian church. What we're seeing then, I think, is a cultural shift, which is very difficult to pin down. This isn't necessarily due to particular laws. This isn't the Soviet Union where certain kinds of speech are actually illegal, or where people are going to jail because they've broken a particular law, saying a particular thing about a particular leader. Instead, what we're seeing is particular lobby groups that represent particular minorities, and in this case, it's the LGBTQ minority, that are pressuring governments and institutions, and often big business, as it turns out, to suppress conservative and Christian speech on issues that they don't want to hear about.
Well, Simon, just finally then, how would you advise Christians to make sure that we push back, fight back, if I can use a word like that, to ensure that we don't end up in a situation where people do go to jail? I mean, already people are facing fines. Schools could face closure as a result of this law that's on the, in the wings now. How do we make sure we don't go any further down a totalitarian path? Because I don't think it's it's being too hyperbolic to say that that's where we're headed.
Yep. I agree, Lyle. Look, the advice I would give at this point is multifaceted. One is, I believe that people who are Christian, or even if they're not Christian, but they have more socially conservative views, should find communities of support and connection where they can be aligned in their social lives, in their business lives, and in their religious lives, and in their family lives with other people who are of a similar mind. I think this builds community, and this builds robustness, and to quote Nassim Taleb, a kind of anti-fragile approach to a future which doesn't look particularly bright for people who might have those values. So that's the first thing I would do. I think I would take a kind of, to sort of harken back to something that Rod Dreher talked about a number of years ago, a sort of Benedict option, where you deliberately put yourself in a community that we'll be able to support you, and you'll be able to support other people going forward. But in terms of coalface activism, legislative change, and so on, I still think there's space for Christians to have an impact on what's happening. I think in the recent past there have been people pushing back, and that there have been changes that have gone in the right direction. Yeah. It feels a little bit like it's an inevitable thing that things will be going in the wrong direction, but that's not necessarily the case. We don't know the future, and I still think there's really good work to do for Christians to speak to their local MPs. Often local MPs don't realise that people don't agree with the LGBTQ lobby, for example, and so hearing from them is a really from people like you and I and other local constituents is a really important step. But also joining groups and encouraging churches not necessarily to become political, but to ensure that they hold the line on these issues and don't cave in.
Yeah, no, very sage advice. I'm not sure about the Benedict option. I think there's credit in that, although that's not working for the Christian school movement, because this law could close them down. But I think certainly your advice about speaking up and making our voices heard is really important. And I'd also read Quadrant magazine, and I'd encourage all our listeners and viewers to go and read Simon's excellent article and the other articles there. Simon Kennedy, thank you so much for giving of your time today.
Thanks, Lyle. Appreciate you having me on.